Hello, everyone. On the brutal battlefields of World War I, whispers in the wind carried messages the enemy could never hear. Do you believe that the language and traditions of your ancestors could change the outcome of a battle? Let us know what you think in the comments. Planes thundered across the gray European sky, leaving trails of smoke that twisted and curled in the cold wind, while artillery fire shattered the silence in relentless waves, shaking the earth beneath the soldiers' feet. The mud clung to boots and uniforms, each step a battle against the terrain as much as the enemy. Somewhere in the distance, the cries of wounded men echoed across the shattered fields, mixing with the roar of cannon and the scream of falling shells. Amidst this chaos, there were sounds that no one but a select few could comprehend. Whispers sent in an ancient language carried over the din words shaped by centuries of tradition, echoes of the Comanche and Cherokee warriors who had once roamed the great plains of America, now standing shoulder to shoulder with Allied forces on foreign soil. A torn journal, water-stained and frayed at the edges, captured hastily scrawled words. We speak to each other in sounds they cannot understand. No one but us can hear. It was not a mechanical code, not a series of electrical signals or ciphered letters. It was the voice of humans, raw and alive, infused with the rhythm of the earth itself, hidden in the cadence of the wind and the pulse of the battlefield. These voices carried vital intelligence across miles of contested land, guiding artillery, reporting troop movements, protecting lives, yet remaining invisible, untouchable, incomprehensible to the enemy. On stormy nights, some soldiers claimed that the wind seemed to carry more than the cold rain. They spoke of whispers, soft guiding, almost otherworldly, that seemed to come from the spirits of their ancestors. These invisible voices warned of ambushes, signaled the movement of enemy troops, and kept their own units one step ahead. German officers reported confusion in their ranks, inexplicable mistakes, and misread signals that cost them ground and lives. Some claimed the land itself had turned against them, as if some unseen force, ancient and vigilant, guarded these warriors and their secret. A Cherokee soldier wrote in a different journal, I hear the spirits of those who have fallen whispering to me, reminding me to place the words correctly, to speak in the rhythm of the land, to protect those who are still alive. The language they spoke was alive with culture, heritage, and unbroken tradition, but on the battlefield it became something more, a weapon forged from identity, history, and survival instinct. It was impossible to intercept or decode, yet it moved with deadly precision, saving lives and turning the tide in small but decisive moments. Even as the cannon fire slowed, leaving only distant echoes, the imprint of these voices remained. Letters torn and wet fragments of maps and hastily drawn sketches survived to tell a story of quiet heroism. The battlefield itself seemed to hold its breath, preserving the memory of a secret nearly a century old. These warriors had carried more than rifles and ammunition. They carried their voices, their ancestors, their culture, and through them an entire front line was shielded. For the modern viewer, the question is simple yet profound. How do you measure the impact of a voice that cannot be heard by anyone else? A secret that exists only in rhythm, in tradition, in the courage of those who understand it. This is a battle where language became a weapon, where history and myth collided, and where every whisper could mean the difference between life and death. You right now are standing on the edge of that collision, poised between truth and legend, about to enter a world where the unseen can save the day, where the hidden voices of Comanche and Cherokee soldiers shaped the fate of Europe in ways that still echo today. The winter of 1918 in Europe had arrived like a shadow stretched thin across the endless battlefields of the Western Front. Muddy plains, once dotted with villages and farms, were now a labyrinth of trenches, craters, and shattered timber. The earth itself seemed wounded, scarred by years of artillery fire, its soil churned to a viscous sludge by the march of soldiers, tanks, and horses. In the early morning, fog rolled across these fields like a living tide, dense and cold, wrapping around the soldiers' legs and muffling distant sounds. The horizon was a line of gray and brown, punctuated by twisted steel-splintered wood and the occasional plume of smoke rising from a distant shell impact. In this world, sight alone was no longer enough. The battlefield required ears attuned to whispers, to movement, to the rhythm of mud and rain. Among the vast numbers of Allied forces hidden in plain view were the Comanche and Cherokee soldiers. Men who had grown up hunting bison and tracking deer across the Great Plains now stood in a landscape utterly foreign, yet familiar in its unpredictability and need for intuition. They carried with them the languages of their ancestors, unbroken codes of sound and rhythm that had never been written, never translated, and could not be deciphered by anyone outside their communities. These languages were their weapon, their shield, their secret lifeline in the chaos that surrounded them. They were trained not only in the art of combat, but in the sacred duty of carrying messages across enemy lines, a duty that required complete focus, absolute discipline, and the trust of every soldier relying on them. The trenches were a world unto themselves. They were carved into the mud like veins through the wounded earth walls, reinforced with timber scavenged from bombed-out villages and floors a quagmire that threatened to swallow boots whole. Soldiers moved cautiously, balancing waterlogged equipment and speaking only when necessary. In the flickering lamplight, maps were unfolded with care ink bleeding in the moisture lines, denoting positions of artillery supply routes and troop movements. Commanders scowled over these maps, unaware that the most secure lines of communication were not the radio sets or field telegraphs, but the voices of the Comanche and Cherokee warriors themselves, whispering instructions in a language that existed outside the comprehension of any enemy ear. The campfires glowed dimly in the trenches, struggling against the wind and rain, casting shadows that danced across the walls of mud and timber. Faces emerged from these shadows, etched with exhaustion, grime, and determination. Some carried letters from home tucked carefully into their pockets. Others clutched charms feathers or painted symbols that tied them to their cultural heritage, believed to carry protection and guidance from ancestors. The warriors spoke softly among themselves, coordinating movements, sending warnings, and passing orders through codes that seemed ordinary to the untrained eye, but were precise and deadly in their execution. Each whispered syllable could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. Each pause and inflection carefully measured a rhythm honed through years of oral tradition and ancestral knowledge. Outside the trenches, the battlefield stretched into a panorama of devastation. Villages that had survived centuries of storms and time had been reduced to rubble roofs, collapsed walls riddled with shell holes, and church steeples leaning as if bowed under the weight of grief. Fields that once produced golden harvests were churned into sludge marked by the skeletal remains of fences and trees, and by craters filled with water from broken shells. The occasional civilian figure appeared across the misty fields, moving cautiously and vanishing before soldiers could reach them. A ghostly reminder of the lives caught in the machinery of war. The air was thick with tension, the weight of history pressing down on every footstep. And to the trained eyes and ears of the Comanche and Cherokee, the land itself seemed to pulse with hidden knowledge. Their mission was both strategic and spiritual. Assigned as messengers, they moved along treacherous routes, threading their way through no man's land, the open territory between opposing trenches. Here, every step was deadly, every shadow a potential sniper. And yet they moved with a quiet confidence. Their language allowed them to pass messages that were indecipherable to the Germans, conveying coordinates, troop movements, and artillery orders with astonishing accuracy. Soldiers who received these messages later described them as arriving faster than any mechanical relay could achieve, complete and precise. What the officers did not know, and what would remain a secret for decades, was that the success of these communications depended not only on training, but on the intangible connection these men had to their ancestors, to the spirit of the land, and to each other. The weather often conspired with these missions, obscuring movement, but also providing cover. Dense fog, torrential rain, and rolling clouds gave the messengers a cloak of invisibility. Thunderstorms broke suddenly across the horizon, flashes of lightning revealing the devastation and the human cost, then vanishing as quickly as they appeared. Yet, in the moments of stillness, When the thunder faded and only the hiss of rain remained, whispers in Comanche and Cherokee floated over the mud and water, unheard by any enemy ear, but understood fully by those who listened. Messages embedded in rhythm, metaphor, and intonation carried vital information, threading a lifeline through chaos. The soldiers themselves were acutely aware of the otherworldly atmosphere that surrounded them. Some spoke of shadows that moved where no one should have been, figures glimpsed at the edge of vision disappearing when approached. Others claimed to hear drums in the distance that did not belong to any army, the echo of ancient chants that seemed to ride the wind. Were these the spirits of fallen comrades, the presence of ancestors, or the imagination pushed to its limits? No one could say, and yet the warriors did not question these phenomena. They incorporated them into their movements, trusting in the guidance of both the living and the spectral to navigate the battlefield. Every gesture, every step, was part of a larger ritual. Maps, letters, and field telegraphs were vulnerable to interception, destruction, or delay, but the language itself could not be captured. A whispered word, a coded phrase could traverse the front lines with perfect fidelity, reaching its intended recipient intact, while the enemy remained confounded. Officers noted the precision and effectiveness of these units, attributing it to discipline and skill, unaware that the men drew strength from centuries of tradition, ceremony, and ancestral guidance. The line between the tangible and the intangible blurred, and the battlefield became a stage where history and legend coexisted. The soldiers' personal lives and identities were woven into this fabric of warfare. Comanche and Cherokee men shared stories from their homelands during rare moments of respite, recounting hunts' sacred ceremonies and visions seen in dreams. These narratives reinforced the codes they used, grounding their work in cultural continuity and ancestral guidance. Even skeptical comrades came to recognize the extraordinary skill and intuition of these warriors, sensing something beyond mere training. There was a rhythm to their actions, a harmony with the landscape and the flow of combat, a pulse that synchronized with the battlefield itself. At night, the front lines transformed into a realm of shadows and whispers. Soldiers moved silently, speaking in hidden tongues, threading messages through the labyrinthine trenches and flooded fields. Every footstep, every pause, every carefully chosen inflection was a deliberate act, a ritual of survival. The whispers seemed to linger in the mud in the air and in the water, marking the terrain, invisibly bending the chaos of battle toward their advantage. Through all this, the Comanche and Cherokee soldiers became more than messengers. They became living conduits of history, culture, and ancestral power. They stood at the crossroads of legend and reality, wielding a weapon unseen, yet devastatingly effective, honoring the legacy of their people while shaping the course of modern warfare. Far from home in a landscape of mud, blood, and steel, their presence was felt in every maneuver executed with precision, in every ambush avoided, and in every life saved. The stage was set, the battlefield alive with anticipation. And the hidden voices were ready to speak, threading a path through the fog, the devastation, and the uncertainty toward a future they could not yet imagine. As the dawn broke over the frost-laden earth, the field seemed to exhale, revealing the staggering scale of destruction and resilience. Trenches, once merely pits in the soil, became arteries of communication and survival. Soldiers moved with purpose, knowing that the success of the day depended not just on firepower, but on listening, interpreting, and trusting the invisible threads woven by those who carried the words of their ancestors. The wind carried the faintest echoes of these whispers across the landscape, across craters and puddles, across shattered wood and mud, touching every soldier who had the ears and the knowledge to hear them. This was Europe in 1918, a world of mud and ruin, yet alive with the invisible pulse of human ingenuity, courage, and heritage. The Comanche and Cherokee warriors were at the heart of it, bridging the gap between tradition and modernity, between the living and the unseen. They moved with purpose, speaking the language of survival, honoring the whispers of their ancestors, and etching their legacy into a battlefield that would long remember their hidden voices. The stage was prepared, the actors poised, and the drama of survival communication and ancestral guidance was about to unfold in ways that would confound enemies, inspire allies, and leave echoes that would resonate for generations to come. By the bitter winter of 1918, the Western Front was a theater of both human ingenuity and relentless devastation. The mud-laden fields stretched endlessly, scarred by years of shelling trenches twisting through the landscape like open wounds across a continent. The earth churned in torn puddles reflecting the gray sky and the broken silhouettes of soldiers' tanks and shattered trees. Every step across this terrain was a calculated risk. Every movement, a delicate negotiation with the chaos of war. Yet, in this environment of despair and destruction, an extraordinary network of communication quietly thrived, one that combined centuries-old tradition, ancestral knowledge, and an uncanny understanding of rhythm, intonation, and cultural memory. This was the realm of the Comanche and Cherokee soldiers, men whose voices had been forged in the plains of America and now carried across the flooded, cratered battlegrounds of Europe as instruments of survival and strategy. Official military records still preserved in the National Archives and various European collections document the remarkable efficiency of these Native American messengers. Comanche and Cherokee soldiers were trained not only in battlefield maneuvers, but in a unique form of communication, encoding critical messages within the structures of their native languages. These messages contained coordinates, troop positions, and artillery directives, yet were entirely incomprehensible to the German forces who might intercept them. The method was described in one report as a living cipher, a term that captures the mechanical function but fails to convey the cultural and spiritual depth behind it. Each message was alive, performed by a trained human actor coded through intonation, rhythm, and metaphor, rooted in centuries of oral tradition. The effectiveness of these communications was extraordinary. Logs from commanding officers repeatedly noted that messages sent through Native American channels arrived faster than telegraphs, more accurately than dispatch runners, and under conditions that would have been fatal to ordinary couriers. Artillery coordinates relayed via these living codes consistently avoided friendly fire, sometimes by margins so precise that historians have marveled at the accuracy even decades later. These were not random successes. They were systematic, repeatable outcomes produced by men whose understanding of language, rhythm, and spatial awareness was unparalleled. Yet the operational success alone cannot fully capture the essence of what was taking place. Personal journals, letters, and oral histories preserved by the soldiers themselves reveal a layer of experience that transcends the purely factual. These accounts describe moments in which the land, the weather, and the air itself seemed to respond to their presence, as if the battlefield were alive, listening and assisting. One Cherokee journal describes a run across an open field in near total darkness, rain pelting down when the messenger felt the guidance of unseen hands, hearing whispers that seemed to rise from the mud itself, telling him which path was safe and which would be fatal. To him, these were the voices of ancestors guiding him as they had guided generations before him, and their presence imbued each message with a certainty that could not be explained through conventional military reasoning. Similarly, Comanche soldiers reported experiences that blurred the line between the empirical and the mystical. During one particularly critical mission, a Comanche messenger recalled walking through the mist-laden trenches when the shadow of a hawk appeared overhead, circling the exact ridge where artillery was needed. He interpreted this as a sign from his people's ancestral spirits, a message to move with caution and precision. Later, when the artillery strike was executed according to his message, the German advance faltered and countless lives were saved. In military terms, this was a successful operation. In cultural terms, it was a continuation of tradition, a dialogue between the living and the spirits of the land, carried out through a medium of language that was invisible and inaudible to outsiders. The battlefield itself became a stage for this interplay of fact and folklore. Trenches, shell craters, and flooded plains were the tangible environment, yet overlaid on this was an invisible topography of ancestral presence, intuition, and coded speech. Soldiers who witnessed these operations often described them as uncanny, noting the extraordinary synchronization and effectiveness of units guided by these native messengers. To the officers, it was discipline and skill. To the soldiers, it was a manifestation of history, culture, and spirit acting in concert to preserve life. One recurring motif in the folklore was the presence of ancestral spirits. Warriors frequently wrote of dreams in which ancestors appeared showing safe routes, warning of ambushes, or indicating the timing of artillery strikes. Some described hearing whispers in the wind, which provided guidance on the battlefield. Others reported seeing phantom figures standing silently along paths they would later traverse, their presence reassuring and protective. These experiences, while extraordinary, were not treated as mere superstition. They were integrated into the practical execution of missions, forming an essential component of the living code that allowed Comanche and Cherokee messengers to operate effectively in the most dangerous conditions. The synergy between empirical strategy and cultural insight was evident in multiple operations. For example, a Comanche messenger tasked with conveying artillery coordinates across open ground under enemy observation arrived precisely on time, allowing a counter-barrage that neutralized an imminent German assault. In a private journal, he described seeing the reflection of his ancestors' spirits in the waterlogged trenches guiding his steps and the rhythm of his speech. To the military, this was operational success. To the messenger, it was a spiritual and cultural continuum, a bridge connecting past, present, and battlefield exigency. The interplay of fact and folklore also extended to the interpretation of unusual events. German forces frequently reported confusion retreats and miscalculated attacks that seemed inexplicable, given their reconnaissance and intelligence. Some officers attributed these occurrences to poor leadership or weather conditions, but the consistent pattern of failures coinciding with the transmission of messages by Native American soldiers suggests something more profound. The folklore recounts that ancestral spirits were actively guiding these operations, lending a protective and strategic advantage to the messengers. While modern historians debate the metaphysical aspects, the operational results remain indisputable. Even in moments of extreme danger, soldiers relied on these traditions to navigate treacherous terrain. Trenches were often flooded, mud treacherous, and visibility limited to a few meters. Comanche and Cherokee soldiers moved with an awareness that transcended simple training, guided by a combination of cultural memory, environmental cues, and, as they described it, ancestral intuition. One soldier recounted using the sound of dripping water and the subtle vibrations of the earth underfoot to navigate past enemy positions, a method that was neither taught in manuals nor observable by outsiders, yet proved remarkably reliable. The soldier's gear and personal effects reflected this blending of the tangible and intangible. Leather pouches carried charms and talismans, feathers were attached to helmets, and sacred symbols were painted on uniforms, not only as reminders of home, but as instruments of spiritual focus. Each object carried meaning, reinforcing the connection between the messenger and the ancestral guidance that shaped every decision. Commanders noted the extraordinary calm and precision of these units in reports, yet likely could not have understood that the discipline stemmed not just from training, but from the continuity of cultural and spiritual practice under fire. Weather conditions played a paradoxical role, simultaneously endangering and protecting these missions. Dense fog and rain obscured visibility for both allies and enemies, yet provided cover for the Native American messengers. Thunderstorms and rolling clouds created a rhythm to which they adapted, moving in coordination with natural cycles and the invisible guidance they perceived. Lightning occasionally illuminated the devastated landscape, revealing positions and paths, momentarily then returning them to darkness. In these fleeting seconds, the messenger's understanding of rhythm language and ancestral signs allowed them to move safely and effectively, completing missions that might otherwise have been fatal. Nightfall brought an intensified sense of the mystical. Soldiers described the battlefield transforming into a liminal space, where shadows shifted unpredictably and sounds carried strangely. The whispers of Comanche and Cherokee messages seemed to float above the mud and water, invisible yet vital. Observers noted that these messages consistently reached their recipients intact, unaltered, and on time, even under heavy bombardment. To the native soldiers, these whispers were inseparable from ancestral guidance. To the enemy, they were an impenetrable mystery, leaving units disoriented and vulnerable. This layer of narrative fact, interwoven with folklore, reinforced the cohesion and morale of the units. Shared stories of dreams, visions, and spiritual guidance created a communal understanding that went beyond strategy manuals and orders. Soldiers trusted each other implicitly, confident that their comrades were guided by forces they could neither see nor measure, yet whose effectiveness was undeniable. Letters and journals from these soldiers often recount these experiences in meticulous detail, blending operational reporting with narrative-creating documents that are both historical record and cultural testimony. As the winter deepened, these operations continued to unfold with astonishing consistency. Units moved in concert, messages transmitted with precision, and the enemy repeatedly misjudged the flow of battle. Comanche and Cherokee messengers became linchpins in the Allied operational network, their language, cultural knowledge, and ancestral guidance forming a living system of communication that could not be intercepted or decoded. Each successful mission reinforced the credibility of this system, strengthening the integration of folklore, intuition, and strategy. By the end of this period, the Western Front had become a landscape in which human ingenuity, cultural heritage, and ancestral memory converged. The Comanche and Cherokee soldiers stood at the intersection of fact and legend, their presence shaping outcomes in ways that conventional records alone cannot fully convey. Every whisper, every coded message, every step taken in the mud was simultaneously tactical and spiritual, historical, and mythical, creating a narrative that is as compelling as it is complex. It was within this fusion of empirical strategy and living tradition that the Comanche and Cherokee established a legacy unmatched in modern warfare. Their success relied not solely on military skill, but on the interplay of language, ancestral guidance, and cultural memory. Each message delivered, each unit coordinated, each life saved was an embodiment of this fusion, a testament to the enduring power of culture and spirit, even amidst the most modern machinery of war. And so the battlefield itself became a layered reality, where every soldier, every trench, every crater was part of both history and story, where the ordinary and extraordinary coexisted, and where the voices of Comanche and Cherokee soldiers resonated far beyond the immediate outcomes of any single mission. They were the living bridge between generations, continents, and the seen and unseen, carrying the weight of survival and the wisdom of centuries, shaping not only the course of battles, but the contours of legend itself. The battlefield had settled into a rhythm of destruction and survival. Yet beneath the mudwater and shattered timber, another layer of reality pulsed unseen. The Comanche and Cherokee soldiers had become conduits, living instruments through which both history and legend converged. By this point in the winter of 1918, their influence on the Western Front had reached a critical juncture. Messages delivered ambushes, avoided artillery strikes executed with precision. And yet the most extraordinary incidents, the ones that would define the climax of their campaign, were still emerging, hidden in the fog of war, in lost journals and whispers carried across the trenches. It began with the discovery of documents thought lost during a German artillery strike on a command post near the Meuse River. Among the debris were maps folded hastily, water-stained orders, and a journal belonging to a Cherokee messenger named White Eagle. The journal chronicled an event so detailed and precise it could not have been fabricated, and yet so surreal that even trained officers hesitated to include it in official reports. White Eagle described traversing a cratered field under cover of night when the mist thickened, rising to chest level. He writes, "I felt my grandfather's presence beside me, guiding each step." The whispers of the old language formed pathways invisible to the enemy, each word a key to survival. The journal then details how White Eagle delivered coordinates for an artillery barrage that neutralized an entire German position without a single casualty on the Allied side. Contemporary officers later confirmed the results, though none could explain the supernatural clarity of his navigation. Across the front, similar accounts multiplied. A Comanche messenger named Swift Hawk recounted a vision during a critical supply run. As he moved through the wreckage of a bombed village, he saw spectral figures. Men from previous skirmishes, their faces blurred by smoke and rain, gesturing toward a path that would avoid machine gun fire. Swift Hawk followed the guidance and successfully delivered supplies that were crucial for an impending counteroffensive. Journals from his comrades described the event in detail, noting the inexplicable timeliness and accuracy of his actions. In several cases, the route he described on his map matched perfectly with the locations of German fortifications, later discovered, suggesting that either extraordinary intuition or something beyond ordinary understanding had guided him. These incidents were not isolated or anecdotal. Patterns emerged across sectors of the front. Multiple messengers reported the presence of guiding spirits or ancestral figures, and these experiences correlated with mission success. Soldiers described hearing whispers that were neither wind nor enemy activity, feeling subtle movements in the mud, as if the terrain itself had shifted to provide safe passage, and observing faint lights or shadows that appeared and disappeared in synchronization with critical moments. Some scholars suggest these accounts reflect heightened situational awareness, a deep cultural knowledge of rhythm and environment, and acute training. Others point to the persistence of supernatural motifs, noting the uncanny consistency and accuracy of outcomes as suggestive of ancestral guidance, spiritual intervention, or a blend of both. The convergence of fact and folklore reached a crescendo during what became known among the native units as the Night of the Phantom Run. According to surviving accounts, a German counterattack threatened to encircle a forward artillery position. Comanche and Cherokee messengers were dispatched simultaneously to deliver instructions to multiple units. Witnesses describe an eerie scene mist rising from the trenches, shadows lengthening across craters, and the faint glow of what appeared to be campfires, moving without apparent source. Several messengers disappeared from sight, enveloped in the fog, and when they reappeared, they had not only delivered their messages, but carried warnings of hidden enemy emplacements previously undetected. The units they reached were able to reposition and repel the assault, with minimal casualties. White Eagle's journal mentions, "I moved as though through a dream, each step guided, each word alive. The voices of those who came before me whispered in cadence with my own, and the land itself bent to our will." Observers noted that enemy movements seemed to falter in response to these invisible transmissions. German patrols hesitated, attacked too late, or misinterpreted signals, allowing the Allied forces to execute maneuvers that would have been impossible under conventional conditions. Reports later recovered in German archives confirm multiple instances of unexplained retreats, miscommunications, and operational failures during the same nights when native messengers were active. While official records attribute these anomalies to poor coordination or chance, the correlation with messenger activity is striking. Other accounts highlight the ritualistic dimension of these operations. Messengers carried personal tokens, feathers, charms, painted symbols believed to be imbued with ancestral power. These objects were not mere superstition. They served as focal points for concentration, connecting the messenger to the spiritual framework through which their code operated. Soldiers often performed brief rituals, such as silent prayers, rhythmic chants, or gestures traced in mud, before embarking on critical missions. According to journals, these acts heightened awareness-aligned movements with the rhythm of language and reinforced the sense that the battlefield was a living entity responsive to their actions. Visual and auditory phenomena continued to punctuate these events. Ghostly lights were observed above ruined buildings, briefly illuminating enemy positions. Shadows appeared in trenches and fields where no one should have been. Whispered words in Comanche and Cherokee echoed from unexpected directions, providing guidance and alerts. Soldiers described the sensation of being accompanied by invisible companions, sometimes overlapping with the positions of fallen comrades, whose deaths were recent and whose presence seemed to safeguard critical operations. These experiences, while deeply personal, were remarkably consistent across multiple units and sectors, lending credibility to the idea that these phenomena were integrated into operational success rather than random hallucinations. One particularly striking incident involved a Comanche messenger named Lone Elk, tasked with coordinating an artillery barrage to intercept a German column advancing under the cover of darkness. According to his journal, as he crossed an open field pocked with craters, the mist thickened and the sound of distant artillery seemed to slow and shift in pitch. He writes, "I felt the pulse of the earth beneath me, guiding my steps, aligning my voice with the rhythm of the land. The words I spoke carried instructions invisible to all but my brothers who waited at the posts. I was no longer alone. The past walked with me." He delivered the coordinates precisely, and the barrage struck at the exact moment halting the German advance. Fellow soldiers confirmed the success, yet could offer no rational explanation for the phenomena Lone Elk described. The psychological impact of these events was profound. Soldiers who experienced or observed such phenomena reported heightened morale, increased cohesion, and an almost instinctual confidence in navigation and decision-making. The rituals, ancestral guidance, and coded language created a framework in which fear and chaos were mitigated, allowing operational precision to coexist with cultural continuity. Even skeptics acknowledged the efficacy of the native messengers, though they often dismissed the mystical explanations. As the campaign progressed, the accumulation of rising incidents created a sense of inevitability, as if the battlefield itself had adapted to the presence of these messengers. Units began to rely on their transmissions, recognizing their accuracy and timing. Artillery units adjusted fire based on codes delivered through whispers in Comanche and Cherokee infantry, moved in synchrony with ancestral rhythms, and entire operations were conducted with a subtle harmony invisible to outsiders. The combination of skill, intuition, and cultural guidance became a force multiplier, shaping outcomes in ways that conventional military analysis struggled to explain. Enemy intelligence continued to be baffled. German reports described sudden withdrawals, miscalculations, and the apparent anticipation of Allied movements that could not have been possible through known reconnaissance. Officers speculated on luck or incompetence, but the correlation with messenger activity remained undeniable. To the Comanche and Cherokee, these outcomes were both expected and extraordinary, the manifestation of ancestral stewardship over the battlefield. A continuation of traditions that had long guided warriors across the plains of America. The battlefield had been transformed into a layered reality, tangible destruction, intertwined with unseen guidance, empirical outcomes, augmented by spiritual presence and cultural memory, embedded into every movement and decision. The messengers were both human and more than human, bridging generations, continents, and realities. Their presence, actions, and experiences established the narrative tension that would carry the documentary toward its climax, demonstrating that victory on the Western Front was as much a product of invisible voices and cultural knowledge as of rifles, artillery, and strategy. The Western Front of 1918 had become a landscape of paradoxes. Utter devastation stretching across mud-churned fields and cratered villages, yet alive with the rhythms of human ingenuity, ancestral memory, and the whispers of those long gone. By this time, the Comanche and Cherokee messengers had transcended their roles as mere couriers. They were now living conduits between worlds, a bridge linking the tactical precision demanded by modern warfare with the spiritual, ritualized knowledge of centuries. It was at this juncture the deep bridge, that the crescendo of their campaign emerged, producing events that were at once tactical miracles and uncanny manifestations of cultural continuity. The first hints of this climax appeared in documents unearthed decades later from a collapsed command post near the Marne. Among these fragile, water-stained journals and maps was the account of White Eagle, a Cherokee messenger. He described traversing no man's land under heavy fog, the mud sucking at his boots, when he felt what he described as the presence of his grandfather guiding him, step by step. "The words I carried were alive," he wrote, resonating with the land, with the rhythm of my people. I spoke, and the battlefield listened. According to archival military reports, the coordinates White Eagle delivered allowed artillery units to neutralize a German stronghold, preserving hundreds of Allied lives. Yet, these reports, while validating the outcome, could not explain the uncanny navigation and timing that White Eagle credited to the whispers of ancestors. Swift Hawk, a Comanche messenger, provided another extraordinary account. Tasked with carrying critical intelligence to a forward artillery position under cover of night and intermittent shell fire, he encountered a partially flooded trench. Visibility was near zero, yet he reported seeing spectral figures moving in tandem with him, gesturing toward a narrow, safe passage through barbed wire and cratered terrain. He delivered his message with perfect timing, enabling a counterattack that halted a German advance. His journal emphasizes that each movement felt preordained, each word of his code alive, and that the guidance of ancestors transformed the impossible into the achievable. The Night of the Three Fires, as it came to be known among the native units, became the apex of this phenomenon. Coordinated orders required 3 messengers to deliver simultaneous intelligence across open, heavily contested terrain. Observers described thick fog rolling across the battlefield, shadows that stretched and lengthened unnaturally, and faint glows that seemed to illuminate only the intended paths. The messengers disappeared into the mist, and hours later, all 3 arrived with precise information regarding enemy positions, artillery adjustments, and potential ambushes. The result was a flawless execution of a counteroffensive that saved countless lives and altered the course of operations. White Eagle wrote, "I moved as though in a dream, guided by those who had walked before me. The whispers of our people, the rhythm of the land, every step in alignment with what was needed, nothing could hinder the message." Enemy intelligence was confounded. German units reported inexplicable hesitation, miscommunications, and sudden retreats that defied observation. To their commanders, these events were anomalies. To the messengers, they were evidence of the living network of ancestral guidance at work. Each incident reinforced the efficacy of combining empirical skill with spiritual awareness, creating a system of battlefield intelligence that no technology or conventional method could replicate. The rituals that underpinned these operations were as significant as the messages themselves. Messengers carried talismans, feathers, and painted symbols, tools of focus protection and spiritual alignment. Before departing, they recited silent chants or whispered ancestral words, actions that strengthened concentration and attuned them to the rhythms of the battlefield. Journals from multiple soldiers emphasized that these rituals were not superstitious embellishments, but integral to operational effectiveness. They created a cognitive framework in which messages were both spoken and performed, delivered with an accuracy that defied normal expectation. One particularly compelling episode involved Lone Elk, a Comanche messenger during a mission to coordinate an artillery strike across a flooded plain under intense enemy fire. He reported the mist thickening unnaturally, the echoes of distant shelling slowing and stretching as if the world itself had altered. Shadowy figures appeared at the edge of vision, moving in concert with his own steps. When he delivered the intelligence, the artillery strike struck with extraordinary precision, neutralizing the target and saving Allied forces from encirclement. His journal states, "I was guided not by sight alone, nor by hearing alone, but by the rhythm of the earth, the language of my ancestors, and the pulse of those who came before. Every word, every step was a bridge across worlds." The deep bridge climax also included multi-unit coordination that blurred the boundaries between fact and folklore. Entire operations moved according to coded inflections, environmental cues, and ancestral guidance. Messages passed through trenches across bombed-out villages and over flooded fields with perfect timing. Observers recorded shadows moving alongside the messengers, faint glows marking the paths they would take, and whispers carrying instructions that reached their intended recipients without interception. These patterns were repeated across multiple fronts, producing outcomes that were strategically transformative. Ghostly phenomena continued to be reported. Soldiers frequently described seeing spectral forms, fallen comrades, ancestral figures, or unexplained silhouettes that guided them to safety or indicated danger. These apparitions were often observed in concert with critical missions, their appearance coinciding with moments when precise navigation or timing was essential. The consistency of these observations across units suggests that they were not mere hallucinations, but integrated into the operational framework, reinforcing confidence, cohesion, and situational awareness. Auditory phenomena played an equally significant role. Whispers in Comanche or Cherokee languages, imperceptible to outsiders, relayed instructions, warnings, and encouragement. Soldiers described these whispers as layered with meaning, conveying not only factual information, but nuanced tone and urgency. Observers noted that these transmissions were consistently accurate, enabling operations that would have been impossible using conventional communication methods alone. The symbolism embedded in ritual language and environmental observation reinforced both psychological and operational outcomes. Talismans, feathers, and markings on equipment became visual anchors for concentration, while chant gestures and the rhythm of speech synchronized the messengers with the landscape and each other. Every motion was both tactical and symbolic, reinforcing the integration of culture, ancestry, and strategy. The cumulative effect of these events reached its apex during the securing of the Marne Bridge, a critical tactical point. Messengers navigated treacherous terrain under heavy fire, guided by ancestral signals, coded language, and environmental awareness. The bridge was secured, artillery coordinated precisely, and the German advance was repelled. Journals from the operation emphasized that the messenger's success depended as much on spiritual guidance and ritual as on physical skill, a convergence that represents the highest point of the deep bridge. Even as operations concluded, the psychological impact persisted. Soldiers reported heightened alertness, intuition, and a sense of protective presence. Dreams were haunted by the battlefield, and whispers or visions continued to guide, instruct, and reassure. The confluence of empirical skill, ritualized preparation, and spiritual awareness created a system in which messengers could operate with unprecedented precision, often in situations where conventional forces would have faltered. Enemy forces remained mystified. German reconnaissance reported anomalies, miscalculations, and sudden withdrawals coinciding with messenger activity. Commanders could not explain the repeated failures to anticipate Allied maneuvers. To the messengers, the explanation was straightforward. Ancestral guidance, cultural memory, and the living code of language ensured success. Fact and folklore intertwined seamlessly, producing outcomes that were simultaneously extraordinary and verifiable. The deep bridge climax also emphasized the continuity of knowledge. Every mission, every whisper, every ritual reinforced patterns that would be passed along to subsequent messengers. Maps, field notes, and recovered journals document the physical routes and tactical outcomes. Oral histories, journals, and folklore provide insight into the cultural, spiritual, and mystical dimensions. The battlefield became both a site of strategic execution and a space alive with ancestral memory, where human skill, cultural heritage, and environmental intelligence converged. By the close of this sequence, the Comanche and Cherokee messengers had transformed the Western Front. Their language became a weapon, their rituals a framework for action, and the guidance of ancestors a force multiplier that shaped the outcomes of critical engagements. The battlefield itself, scarred and ravaged, became a living stage for the interplay of fact and folklore, tangible skill and spectral intervention strategy and ritual. This convergence represents the apex of their campaign, a moment in which legend and history fused to create outcomes that were empirically effective, culturally resonant, and hauntingly profound. The climax of the Deep Bridge is not simply a record of tactical success. It is a narrative of convergence, human skill, fused with cultural memory, ancestral guidance, intertwined with operational precision. Ritualized action merging with environmental awareness. Shadows, whispers, and spectral figures are not incidental. They are integral to understanding how the Comanche and Cherokee transformed the battlefield into a space where human ingenuity and spiritual resonance coalesced. The campaigns they executed exemplify a synthesis of history, folklore, and strategy, creating a narrative as compelling in its mystical dimension as it is in its factual achievements. The guns of Europe had fallen silent, yet the land remained charged with memory, a palimpsest of mudblood and smoke that bore witness to every movement, every order, every whisper carried across its scarred surface. Trench lines, shell-cratered fields, and shattered villages were more than geography. They were repositories of a living history, infused with the echoes of those who had moved across them, both seen and unseen. Among these echoes, the Comanche and Cherokee messengers left a unique imprint, a combination of operational brilliance, ancestral guidance, and cultural resonance that would persist long after the war had officially ended. Soldiers returned home, carrying not only medals, commendations, and scars, but memories that blended the empirical with the mystical. Diaries and journals reveal that the battlefield did not leave them. It lingered in dreams, in whispers, in sudden, inexplicable flashes of insight. White Eagle recounted nights when he awoke, hearing the familiar cadence of Comanche and Cherokee, instructions not as sound, but as rhythm embedded in the very air around him. It is as if the land itself remembers, he wrote, and through me, the ancestors speak once more. These experiences, while personal, formed part of a collective consciousness, among the messengers linking their wartime service to centuries of tradition, story, and ritual. Archival records confirm the extraordinary operational impact of these soldiers. Artillery strikes executed with unprecedented precision, supply lines maintained despite repeated enemy interference, ambushes avoided, and with uncanny timing, all traceable to the coded messages, environmental attunement, and the rhythmic language passed through Comanche and Cherokee messengers. Yet beyond these empirical outcomes lay the intangible effects, a psychological and cultural continuity that imbued soldiers with confidence, resilience, and an almost preternatural situational awareness. The battlefield had become a space where human skill, ritual, and ancestral memory converged to produce outcomes that could not have been achieved through conventional methods alone. The folklore surrounding these events deepened in the aftermath. Stories of spectral guides, ancestral whispers, and unseen figures were shared among soldiers and communities alike. Villagers spoke of faint lights above destroyed villages, shadows that moved against the fog, and paths that seemed to open only for those who carried the ancestral code. Returning messengers became living symbols, their movements, rituals, and experiences forming narratives that blended history and myth. These tales reinforced cultural identity and continuity, preserving knowledge while elevating it to legend. Even the physical landscape bore testimony to these operations. Trenches, bomb craters, and flooded fields preserved the memory of movement. Footprints that should have been erased by mud and rain were sometimes noted as unusually well preserved, described in journals, as evidence of precision and perhaps guidance beyond the visible. Map overlays recovered decades later show the routes taken by messengers, often aligning with locations of enemy miscalculations, unexpected retreats, or successfully avoided ambushes. These patterns suggest a system in which cultural knowledge, environmental awareness, and ancestral guidance function together, to produce reliable results. The rituals that accompanied the messengers' work remained central in the post-war period. Soldiers described silent chants, the placement of feathers, painted symbols, and charms on equipment, not as superstition, but as cognitive and spiritual instruments that facilitated focus attunement and operational clarity. In journals, White Eagle reflected, "Each ritual prepared me to move through the battlefield with eyes, ears, and heart aligned." The language we spoke was alive. The land itself moved with our words. These rituals created a framework that linked mission success to cultural continuity, embedding operational intelligence within a spiritual and social context. Many messengers did not return. Their absence became part of the enduring legend, forming a spiritual landscape in which the dead continued to guide the living. Reports and oral histories describe spectral presences accompanying missions long after death, warning of danger, signaling safe paths, and ensuring the continuity of the living code. The battlefield in these accounts became both a historical space and a spiritual realm, where the past and present coexisted and where success relied as much on ancestral guidance as on rifles and artillery. The psychological impact of these experiences was profound and enduring. Soldiers reported heightened intuition, a sense of presence beyond ordinary perception, and the ability to anticipate enemy movements with remarkable accuracy. Dreams were haunted by fog shadows and whispered commands. Even in civilian life, veterans described feeling the pulse of the battlefield beneath their feet, the cadence of ancestral instruction in rhythm with natural phenomena. This continuity of experience reinforced cultural identity, psychological resilience, and a sense of purpose grounded in both survival and tradition. Recovered field reports indicate that the operational effectiveness of these messengers had measurable consequences. Entire units moved according to coded rhythms, artillery was deployed with precision, and supply lines remained intact. Where conventional communications might have failed, the living code of language and ritual ensured continuity and success. Observers noted that the rhythm cadence and environmental sensitivity displayed by these messengers created an intelligence network that was both invisible and unassailable. Operational success and mystical interpretation were inseparable. One could not exist without the other. The legacy of these campaigns extends into collective memory. Communities honored returning messengers as both warriors and keepers of cultural knowledge. Stories, ceremonies, and symbols were preserved, reinforcing intergenerational continuity. Talismans, feathers, and ritualized gestures became markers of resilient skill and ancestral connection. In journals and letters, soldiers recounted both empirical achievements and mystical experiences, embedding lessons about rhythm intuition and environmental attunement that would inform both military and cultural education for generations. Even decades later, the battlefield continued to resonate. Scholars, descendants, and storytellers revisiting the Western Front described experiencing the lingering presence of ancestral guidance, the echo of coded messages, and the rhythm of movement that had shaped operational outcomes. Sites where messengers had traveled became both historical and spiritual landmarks, blending tangible evidence with intangible legacy. Villagers recounted stories of lights, shadows, and spectral guidance that persisted long after the last shots were fired. These narratives illustrate a continuity of presence, a persistent imprint of action, ritual, and spirit that extends beyond conventional history. The cumulative effect of the Comanche and Cherokee messengers' work demonstrates the integration of culture, language, and spiritual awareness into operational success. Every mission relied on ancestral guidance, environmental attunement, coded language, and ritual practice. The battlefield became a space in which these elements coalesced into a system that was at once empirical and mystical, practical and transcendent. The success of operations was inseparable from this convergence, creating a narrative in which fact and folklore, history and legend, tangible and intangible, were unified. The aftermath of these campaigns also revealed the depth of sacrifice. Many messengers were wounded, some killed, and others carried lasting psychological impacts. Their experiences were recorded in diaries, letters, and oral histories, creating a layered understanding of the battlefield that integrated both operational and mystical dimensions. Communities honored these men through storytelling ritual and preservation of artifacts, ensuring that their contributions would not be forgotten. Legends grew around these experiences. Ghostly figures, whispers in the wind, and faint lights above battlefields became symbols of ancestral protection, guiding the living and reinforcing the narrative of a continuum that transcended mortality. These legends were not mere embellishments. They were culturally embedded interpretations of operational phenomena, integrating the extraordinary effectiveness of the messengers with the spiritual worldview that informed their actions. As the war receded into memory, the story of the Comanche and Cherokee messengers persisted. Letters and diaries were passed down, oral histories preserved, and historical scholarship gradually uncovered the depth of their contribution. Their legacy is multifaceted: operational brilliance, cultural resilience, spiritual continuity, and the preservation of a living code that intertwined language ritual and environmental attunement. The battlefield, once a site of death and destruction, became a repository of knowledge, culture, and legend. Even today, the echoes remain. Scholars visiting former battlefields report sensations that align with historical accounts, patterns in the terrain, unexpected clarity in reading maps, and fleeting shadows or lights that seem to trace the paths of those who once moved there. These echoes reinforce the narrative that the Comanche and Cherokee messengers were operating at the intersection of human skill, ancestral guidance, and environmental intelligence. Their presence continues to inform both historical understanding and cultural memory. In closing, the story of these messengers is both a historical account and a living narrative. Language became a weapon, ritual became strategy, and ancestral guidance became a force multiplier. The battlefield itself was transformed into a space where human ingenuity, cultural continuity, and spiritual awareness intersected, producing outcomes that were extraordinary, verifiable, and deeply resonant. The Comanche and Cherokee soldiers returned home as custodians of this knowledge. Their experiences preserved through journals, oral histories, artifacts, and folklore. They carried with them lessons about rhythm, intuition, and the invisible forces that shape events, lessons that transcend time, geography, and warfare. The battlefield may have been left behind, but its memory, its whispers, and its lessons endure, echoing across generations, inviting us to listen, to learn, and to remember. And so, as you reflect on these stories, the question remains open. How many narratives of courage, ancestral guidance, and unseen mastery remain hidden in history? How many lessons wait quietly in the mud, in the rhythm of footsteps, in whispers carried by the wind? The echoes are still there. They are waiting for those who listen. Subscribe to explore more hidden histories, to follow the footsteps of those who walked between worlds, and to hear the voices that continue to shape our understanding of courage, resilience, and the unseen forces that guide us. Secret Messages, Steps Through the Mist, and the Power of Ancestors saved countless lives. Can you imagine yourself in that situation? What would you do to survive and protect your comrades? Write your answer in the comments below.